everybody. Welcome to another episode of Two Bi Guys, another across the pond episode. I am finally sitting down with another bicon. He's been doing bisexual advocacy for even longer than this podcast has been around. Please welcome, I'm so excited to chat with you, Lewis Oakley, to Two Bi Guys. Hi, Lewis.
Hello, thank you so much for having me. It's so nice that we can have this biconic conversation.
Yes, indeed. Finally, we've been chatting for years, and I feel like we started around the same time. When did Bisexual Brunch start?
Oh my god, sort of pre-pandemic, so it would have been 2020, 2019 maybe.
Yeah.
Because the only reason I agreed to do Bisexual Brunch is because they really sold it to me. Like, we're going to be chatting about bisexuality, but what we're going to do is going to be brunch. So we're going to go for brunch in different fabulous restaurants all around London and all around Manchester, and it's going to be wonderful. And I was like, oh my god, okay, so this is just basically me getting a free lunch. And then the pandemic hit, and they were like, we're going to do it remotely for now. And we've never recorded one out in a restaurant. So
Amazing.
Okay, false advertising.
That's funny. Okay, wait, I have a question about that, but I forgot to introduce you. For those who don't know, Lewis Oakley, he's one of the leading bisexual advocates in the UK. He regularly appears across radio, TV, podcasts, and in print. He's kind of everywhere. If you visit his website, you'll see him everywhere. He's making sure bisexuality is included in national discussions. He was featured as a cover star on Attitude Magazine's Activists and Allies issue in 2020. Been nominated for a Pink News Award and LGBT Campaigner of the Year Award, among others. He's a host of Bisexual Brunch, and he has a new book, Bisexuality, The Basics, which is now available already from Jessica Kingsley Publishers. Yes? Cool. We'll talk about the book in a minute, but I was going to ask you about Bisexual Brunch and the title, because I was like, is there something bisexual about brunch? Which I think there is. But it's interesting that it was just like you were going out for brunch and then doing the podcast, except that never happened.
Yeah, so that was the initial concept. It was like, we go for brunch, we talk about bisexuality. Like, it was going to be like a whole like ASMR thing as well. Like, you'd hear us crunching and stirring our coffee, and it was going to be great. But I mean, look, it's going really well. We can't be upset because it's got a great audience. We're getting to really talk about some good issues, which I'm really loving.
Cool.
But I'm not getting free meals, which is what I was promised.
What a shame. I mean, that's why we get into podcasting, is for the free food. I mean, that's why I did. So that's too bad. And that's why I'm drinking coffee as we chat, to have some little ASMR.
I should have brought coffee. Never mind.
Well, it's like, it's too late. Well, it's still coffee time for me, but you can't have coffee at 6 p.m. in the UK.
Here, exactly.
Yeah. Don't do that. But to me, I thought there's something kind of bisexual about brunch, because like breakfast is nice. You get eggs and coffee and all that. But like lunch, you might get a sandwich and some bread, and I don't know. There's good things about about lunch, and then brunch, just like bisexuality, combines the best of both worlds, and you get it all in one life experience. So to me, brunch is very bisexual inherently. What do you think?
We should have had you write the description for the podcast. That's so much better than what we were thinking.
Well, I can make anything bisexual. That's my superpower. And your episodes, you guys do long. I was looking, like, we both started in 2019, I guess, because I started in 2019 also with Alex. And you've done like 50 something episodes. I think we've done 70 something, but your episodes are like twice as long. So you've actually produced a lot more content. How do you do like 2-hour episodes? I mean, I know there's segments, but isn't that a lot?
They are mammoth. So we have segments, so that's great. Yeah. So I don't actually have to talk for 3 hours. But still, when we do the recordings, like, Ash is always telling me, we'll just do an hour. And then it's sort of 2 hours. You're like, Ash, you said an hour. So they but there is so much to talk about. And what I love about doing a podcast and doing it with two other bisexual people is it's the one place where I don't have to know all the answers. Whenever I go on television, or whenever I write an article, or especially when you write a book, you kind of have to have a position and know what you're talking about. Whereas with the podcast, it can be more of a, I come at it from this point of view, and what do you guys think? And it's something that I think a lot of bisexuals don't ever really get to have, which is being able to bounce off other bisexual people, and maybe
Hmm.
not even reaching a consensus sometimes, but just kind of sharing your own experience and just kind of being able to put your experience into perspective amongst others. And that takes time.
Yeah.
That's why they're 3 hours.
Yeah. And that actually is, I mean, I'm making everything bisexual, but that is kind of a bi thing to do, to like have a point of view that is kind of somewhere in the middle and more nuanced and not like a hard right or left
Yeah.
thing. And so that, I mean, that's like something that's lacking in media outside of this topic as well, is like this nuance and space for
Well, that's why I
meeting in
think
the
I
middle.
do. Yeah, that's why I think I do well in media, and I keep getting invited back to go on TV and radio. Is because they miss the
Yeah.
bisexual perspective, which is, I'm not going to play sides. It's not about left or right or whatever these issues are. Like, actually, we're all still going to have to live on this planet at the end of this discussion at the end of the day. So we have to kind of find that middle ground and actually being able to see things from other people's sides. And I think bisexuals are maybe better placed to do that because we have sort of had years of living in between different cultures, whether you're living in the straight world or the gay world, that, the bisexual culture in the middle doesn't exist as pronounced as it does for maybe the gay culture, where there are,
Yeah.
there's bars and there's gay people tend to know lots of other gay people, whereas with bisexuals, the amount of people I meet that are bisexual that have never really met any other bisexual people, don't even have any bi friends, and so you
Yeah.
constantly are sort of in this world where it's like, well, that doesn't really relate to me the way you
Yeah.
weird little straight people do things, but then the way you weird little gay people go on doesn't really relate to me. So I think it makes you more diplomatic to be bisexual, and then if you can bring that to national discussions about God, whatever they have me on to talk about, I think that they're lost by it, but they keep inviting me back, so it must be all right.
Yeah, I love the weird little straight people and weird little gay people. That's a great little phrase.
Well, not
And
weird,
yeah,
particular. Let's call them particular. But
we could call them weird sometimes. I mean, not weird is okay. That's so funny. And like, yeah, even among bi people, what's interesting is like you can have a different experience or different point of view, and yet it's understood in those spaces I'm in. Like, there isn't this need to figure out the answer. There's an acceptance of maybe there is no answer, and maybe there's just lots of possibilities. And so like the bi discussion group I used to go to and still sometimes go, like, everyone says different things, and sometimes I'm like, no, that's not me, but everyone's very free to express that and feel safe not having to like come down on a certain side, which is kind of nice.
yeah, look at us. If only the buys were more listened to, there'd be no problems in the world.
Indeed, listen to us more and take our subtlety as gospel. I actually want to ask you, before we get into the book in a minute and your whole life story, like I just watched a few clips of you on TV. It is cool that you keep getting invited to these things. I'm jealous of that. But I saw this clip of you on Piers Morgan, and it's
Uh,
exactly what you're talking about. Like, he's very like, what's the deal? Like, tell me about bisexuality. He's very like left and right and going into this woke versus anti-woke and trying to
yeah.
kind of like pin you down on these topics. And you handled it so well.
Oh,
What I
thank you.
loved best. Yeah. I mean, he doesn't seem easy to chat with necessarily. But I loved your facial expressions while he's asking you questions, just kind of very like, very stone face, like, okay. Like, your facial expressions said a lot.
You know what? I can't help it. My facial expression, my other half is always like, we'll just be sat in a room quietly watching TV. She's like, what on earth are you thinking about? Because my facial expressions are like going for it. Sorry,
Uh-huh,
what was your
uh-huh.
question?
Well, what was it like going on that show? How did you
Um,
handle that intensity?
so I think maybe the thing that people don't understand about some of the TV debates like that is you get asked very last minute to do these things. It's sort of like, we are
Mm.
recording in 3 hours.
Mm.
What is your opinion on this? And would you be up for doing it? And then sort of the next thing you know, you're in a taxi on the way to a TV studio. A lot of times you don't get a lot of prep for most of it.
Uh-huh.
And that debate came up, and I kind of, you sort of step back and have a little think about it, because I can talk about bisexuality literally for 3 hours at a time and not bore or get tired. But this debate was about LGBT people in general. So you kind of want to get a sense of what the debate is about and then think, can I argue this? And not even just can I argue it, can I bring some perspective to the discussion? Can I give something to it that someone else won't? So then you kind of okay it. And it was the first time I went on Piers' show. And sort of, you go into makeup and they make sure you look pretty, and then the producer comes in, and depending on what producer you get, sometimes they're like, and that's when you grab the glass of water and you throw it over Piers and you say, "You're an evil monster." No, they're not that far, but sometimes they're like, sometimes they'll come in and be like, you know what, he can take it, so you can throw him what you want, just don't swear.
Wow.
And so then basically, next thing I know, I'm sort of backstage waiting to go on, and they cut to an ad break, and I sort of went into the studio. I sat down next to Piers, and I was kind of like ready to, throw my hand out and say, "How are you?" and all that kind of stuff. And he just sat there absolutely silent, looking down. And I was just like, everyone else has sort of disappeared. It was just us in this really quiet studio. And I was just there like, oh my God, like, this is really awkward. And then I started to think to myself, oh my God, he can't look at me because he's like prepared to take me down. Like, this is going to be it. He's planned what he's going to say. He's going to absolutely like destroy me. And so then I'm getting more worked up. Like, this was a bad idea. You're going on live TV. Like, why? You didn't have to say yes to this. Why did you do this? Where is the exit? And then all of a sudden he looked up and he was like, "Lewis." And it was sort of like he was back in the room, because I, realized then he was listening to what the producer was telling him in his ear, and he was looking down at his cards, getting prepared.
Okay.
But I was just there for 2 minutes being like, oh my God, I'm being ignored. This is a bad sign.
Okay.
And then then we did the debate, which you guys saw, and he was fine. And afterwards, he was really nice and said, "Thank you for coming," shook my hand and everything. And it was actually really fun. The producer messaged me after that and said, he's kicking himself that he didn't go harder on you. And I was like, well, next time. So it was fun. You know what? A lot of these people that have personalities in the media, I find, like, especially the ones that get the bad rap of like they're bad people and blah blah, literally usually the nicest people, at least when you come into their studio. I mean, I can't say for all of their views, and Piers and I definitely disagree on a lot of things. But a lot of the times it's the weirdest things. I found that the people in TV that have the bad rap are usually the nicest, and the people that have the nice rap are usually me.
Interesting.
That's kind of
weird.
My opinion.
Yeah, he does have a bad rap these days. That's good that he was nice to you. It's funny to imagine him sitting there. His producer's probably in his ear being like, "So there's this thing called bisexuality. There's a bisexual man sitting next to you now. Don't look at him." But but let me explain it to you. That's funny. He wanted to go harder at you. It's like, I mean, it was funny because that segment wasn't even, you're right, it wasn't even like about does bisexuality exist. It was more about like the hypocrisy of companies during Pride Month, and as if like you're a representative for those companies. Like, how could he have gone harder at you? You're just like a person who doesn't represent those companies. So that was interesting. And then there was another one that was funny that I just watched. I never heard of this person, but on GB News with Lawrence Fox, do you remember that one?
So that one is a really funny one. So Lawrence Fox, especially in the UK, for those who don't know, like has, a really bad rap now. He's since been let go from GB News, so he doesn't have a show there anymore. So what happened, and me going on GB News as someone that's bisexual, there are people that have problems with it because it's seen as a right-wing channel or whatever, but I very much believe, well, that's where we need to be. Like, there's no point me talking to bisexuals or us. Like, we need to go and talk to people that disagree.
It's brave. That's brave of you. I mean, it's like it's going into hostile territory, but yes, to a certain extent, that is where we need to be.
Yeah,
if you can handle it.
So with Lawrence Fox, so this was the very first time I'd done GB News. And I had done a lot of TV and radio before this. I think this was after the Piers Morgan thing, or maybe around the same time, I can't remember. But basically, Lawrence Fox had someone on his show and talking about something not to do with bisexuality at all. And they kind of got to almost the end of the interview. And then Lawrence turned to this guy and said, "And apparently you've been telling people that you're bisexual." And he was, and this guy was like so put on the spot because it wasn't what he was there to talk about or ask or be asked about. He didn't expect to be asked about his sexuality. And then Lawrence, I can't remember the exact quote now, but basically was like, "There's no such thing as bisexuality. I think you're just greedy, blah blah. You don't, all the old tropes." And like the guy just didn't know how to defend himself because he wasn't prepared for that question. So I wrote to his producer the next day because I know a lot of people in that TV space, and I sent the producer an email like, if he wants to have a proper debate and conversation about bisexuality, like I am ready to go. The producer then emailed back, "Perfect, we've got you in for 7 o'clock on Friday," and I was like, oh, me and my big mouth. What have I got myself into again? And you know what? I got to say, that was probably out of all of the TV work I've done, the one I was the most nervous about. Because not only did Lawrence Fox have a reputation as, people see him as very anti-woke and like, he's not going to take anything, blah, blah, blah. And I just thought to myself, my God, like, what have I got myself into? Like, this guy has known I've been booked for 5 days, so he knows I'm coming. This isn't a last minute thing and he's going to be scrambling for notes. He is going to have thought about this. He's going to have researched it. He's not going to let me just waltz into his studio and make him look like a fool on national TV. And like, we're fundamentally arguing the basics of bisexuality here. And I remember sitting outside the studio and I hadn't gone in yet. And I was like, God, I am nervous. I really am nervous this time. But anyway, I went in and I kind of took it with humor. And you know what? The interview couldn't have gone better. And just to kind of say, because I think at the moment, I don't read any negative stuff that people say to me on Twitter, but this is our system. So I don't read any of the negative tweets. Ash reads them and then WhatsApps me to tell me what people are saying about me online. don't read these. I don't care.
Good.
Ash was saying people are actually having a go about you being on GB News online. This was literally like yesterday. My thought was very much that I can see that poor little bisexual kid that is living at home with their parents because they may be a teenager, and their parents have got this show on, and the host of the show has just said, "There's no such thing as bisexuality. You're just greedy." And then I can imagine, the dad sniggering, and the mom maybe saying, "Bisexuality, you're just gay," and that kid retreating and being like, "Oh my God!" And I just thought how impactful and necessary it would be for me to go there the next week and have that debate with them. And then, even if it's not going to spark a discussion in those houses around, being like, "Oh my God," like the host Lawrence Fox just said, obviously, of course he like understands that bisexuality like exists, and actually they're talking about some specifics now and all that kind of stuff. And I just thought that is what's important. That is why that's why I go on these channels sometimes with debates like that. It's like, well, I'm sorry, but maybe you're the people that we need to have these debates for. But what I will say on Lawrence Fox is that was kind of how it all sort of began in a weird way, because after the cameras ended, so the cameras cut, like TV's done, it was actually the end of his show. I was the last segment. And I put out my hand and said, "Thank you very much for having me on." And he grabbed my hand and pulled me in and gave me a hug. And he was like, "Thank you so much for coming on." And I was like, "Oh, fine. Thanks for having me," like repeating myself. And he literally put his arm over my shoulders and walked me out of the studio and was like, "I know people think I'm a bad guy, but like, honestly, like blah, blah, blah." And was sort of defending himself to me. I was like, "I haven't said anything to you." And then he took me out back and to his producer and was like, "I really want this guy back on. Like, he's like a good conversation." And so then she was like, "Do you want to come back on in a few weeks and we can discuss like just the news topics?" And I was like, "Well, I guess. I mean, and for me, it's like, I think there has to be a balance as well between, I can't just go on and every time talk about bisexuality because people don't want to talk about that every day. But actually, if you can be introduced as, host of the Bisexual Brunch or the writer of Bisexuality, the Basics, it's just that little nugget of like, oh, bisexual, that we're not getting in media. And then we're straight into talking about politics and stuff like that.
Right.
So,
Why not?
So that was how like that kind of stuff started, just doing one good interview with someone. And look, I've since not stopped following Lawrence Fox since his viral video where he set fire to the pride flag. Because I kind of felt like I was making headway with him, and then I saw that video and I was like, "Oh, I don't think you've changed his mind." But that's kind of context on how those things come around. And I do think as well, because there are people out there that can look at me and judge me and be like, "Why are you going on these channels?" and blah, blah, blah. they keep a lot of people employed, and there are a lot of nice people that work there. And as I said, some of the hosts, you might get a certain impression of them, like when you're watching them, but generally they're nice people, like behind the scenes. But also, I think just my bit of that story was I was absolutely terrified to go in. I've been doing this for like 8 years and
Yeah.
know my stuff. It's like people out there sometimes are putting themselves in uncomfortable situations because they're trying to do what they believe is right and have conversations with people that they think need to be had. And to then kind of come back to your own community and then be like, well, you shouldn't have done it. It's like, you know what? You can go. I don't know if you swear on this podcast, but you can go away.
Yes, you can swear on this podcast, but I take your meaning, and yeah, I think it's cool that you went there. And what I loved about it was like how fast you flipped the script on him. Like, so I wrote down the way he started the interview because I was like, oh my god, he literally said he like welcomed you, and then he goes, bisexual, no such thing, change my mind. I was like, wow, what a way to start. Yeah. And then you kind of basically said, well, like, I'm real, I'm here, like, you can touch me, like, if bisexual isn't real, what am I? And then very, very quickly, like, maybe the next thing he said was, well, everyone's a bit everything. And then like a minute later he said, we're all on a bit of a spectrum. So he basically like very quickly acknowledged that this isn't binary. If it's a spectrum and we're all a little bit everything, which I don't necessarily agree with, but like he acknowledged that there's this center space very quickly. So like, and by the end, yeah, he seemed to be like on board that it exists and actually talking about the details of it. So you did exactly what you're saying you set out to do. It was great.
And I think that is this is my thing. I do think like it is the time of the bisexuals, because especially in media, like there are a load of people that I see go on to these TV shows that I know are bisexual, even though it's maybe not something they talk about. But I do think my approach with people like that, of not going in and being like, how dare you say that, you're a bad person, but actually sort of what I try and do is sort of, keep them calm, but make sort of factual points that they can't really argue with, and then find something that completely blows their mind to flip the script. So usually I will go to, the LGBT community doesn't really like bisexual people, and then that sort of throws them, and then they sort of don't know where they sort of don't know where they are, and then you can sort of get more points. So I have it down to a bit of a science when it's those kind of debates now.
Right. I think you mentioned, and also something I like to mention is that, yeah, like people can acknowledge it's a spectrum, and then you say like there's a ton of straight identified people who are not 100% straight, because like statistically that's where most of the fluid people land, is like a 1 or a 2 on the Kinsey scale, at least how they self-identify, and they'll say, and they identify as straight. And that also kind of throws people, where it's like, because I feel like this guy Lawrence, I feel like, especially now that I know he hugged you on the way out and like did all this, like he might be a 1 or a 2 on the Kinsey scale. It feels like he identifies, there's more people who identify with that than who identify with the word bisexual. And it feels like you got to him in a certain way, and you can get to people through those statistics that are not just like, yay, rah, rah, bisexual, but actually like the complicatedness of it.
It's so weird. It is just so weird what I found. Like the word bisexual just has, it's almost like throwing like a shield in someone's face, and they just have so many preconceived notions and such a bit of a weird understanding of what it is, even though it's not something they were ever taught in school or not something they're really informed of. It's just sort of this sort of background prejudice that's still there. In an age where people are trying to get rid of like prejudices, it's like, how is it this is the only one still standing that hasn't really been tackled? But once you actually talk to people about it, and once you get into nitty gritty, people are often like, the most common things I hear is like, oh, I never thought about that, or oh, that's right. And it's almost like I almost don't want to I do want to use the word bisexual, but obviously if it's like, if you didn't use the word, you just kind of put these arguments and points in front of them, they would so get it. It's just so weird that when you then put the word bisexual on top of it, people are like,
yeah,
it's so odd.
Exactly. It's a bit of a catch-22 because we want to be visible with the word, but at the same time, there's stigma to it and there's much more acceptance of the stuff underneath the word and the fluidity, and like the younger generations, I feel like they're understanding all of that middle space and fluidity, even though some of them are sort of not attaching themselves to the word. They don't want to attach themselves to any word, is something I'm seeing more of. Like, no, don't label me. I'm not straight. I'm not bi. I'm whatever I am. I'm me. I'm Rob or whatever. Like that seems to be the trend, which is kind of cool. And at the same time, it's like also nice to have a word to be able to talk about what that is.
Yeah.
So it's a catch-22. Let's talk about your book and all the stuff about bisexuality that's in there. Your book is called Bisexuality: The Basics. It's out a couple months ago, I believe. Tell us, like, how did it come about, and why did you want to write this book?
So, whenever I go on television and talk about bisexuality or radio, or whenever I write an article, because I really started out writing articles, and I think that the reason I got cut through was that I was able to write for national publications about bisexuality. You know, the Metro, the Telegraph, the Daily Mail, like things just unheard of for covering bisexuality or really any LGBT stuff outside of, you know, crazy gay person has assaulted someone because they didn't like them or whatever, you know.
Yeah.
And again, that mix of left-wing and right-wing publications. And I think that was what really set me apart, was that I figured out ways to pitch them, ideas for stories, and then get in there. And I took my top off a lot, so that helped.
Yes, I saw a lot of those pictures.
Whatever you have to do.
Yeah. Whatever sparks a bi awakening in someone. For some people it's text, for most people it's a photo.
Yeah. So the weird thing I found after that was how clogged my inbox would be. And it would be from bisexual people, literally from all around the world. Like, I've been saying postcards from like Canada and South Africa and different like places where people are, oh my God, I've never read about bisexuality in the mainstream media. Or some people be like, I've never even heard of another bi guy, and it was so reassuring to read your piece. Or some people be like, I read your piece about bisexuals and relationships, and oh my God, it made me feel so not alone, and blah, blah, blah. And a lot of them would come with questions. And so I would, you know, do my best to, you know, reply to the questions. But I do have like a full-time job and lots of side projects and children, and basically like replying to all of these emails and the questions. And especially when you want to give it thought as well. Like some people are literally, it's like they're opening up to you for the first time. They've never told anyone else they're bisexual. Mm-hmm. They're really struggling with something. They don't feel like they've got anyone else to turn to except some guy that they read their article on the internet. So they're kind of like long emails to write. And also you're kind of like, I don't know your life and I don't know your partner. Like, what? So anyway, I just couldn't keep up with it. And I always felt bad where I'd read an email and just be like, I don't have time to reply to it. Or I would, you know, I'd always be like, I'm going to reply to this. And then 3 months later be like, oh my God, look at these 18 emails I didn't get back to. So what I eventually did was I pitched the idea of an advice column to bi.org, where I could take these questions, generalize them. So usually the name and age and location has changed a little bit just to protect people's anonymity, and respond to them publicly. So then there would be this bank online of me answering these questions, because a lot of them are similar. So that was what I kind of did, and I've been doing that 3 or 4 years now. And then this publisher, you know, found me, and we were sort of talking through ideas and do I want to write a book, and would a book really work? And there's lots of other books on bisexuality, like what would make this one different? And it was actually the publisher that said, look, what we really love is your advice column. And actually like pulling all that together into a book form where we generalize. So it's not sort of, you know, Rob from New York asking a question. It's just sort of general, like, I'm in a relationship and I'm worried about this.
Yeah.
They really thought that could work. So I basically had to write like a introductory chapter and some chapter titles and things like that. And then they were like, yeah, you got a book deal. Get it done within 9 months. So I'm like, what have I regret? And this is always the way. I'll be like, yes. And then I'll be
Then you
sat outside a
actually have to
TV
do it.
studio or sat with a contract on my desk like, oh my God, I've got to write a book now. Like, what do you put this through?
Yeah, the writing of the book process for me was a lot harder than than getting the book deal, actually, which was surprising. I thought it would be harder to get the deal, but somehow it came about, and then like you actually have to sit down and do it, and that was intense. But your book is great. It's very like easy to read, and I like all these like questions you ask, because it's like it is sort of in a Q&A format. You can kind of skim and find the like a question you have and read your answer. So it's a great book for people approaching the subject and looking for answers and looking for advice. I want to ask you about a few of the things you talked about in the book, because some of it was really interesting, and like there is basic stuff like what is bisexuality, right? And
Yeah,
we're a little beyond that, you
I
and me,
want the book to appeal to everyone.
Right.
So you've
Right.
got to
And
take
so
them right from the beginning.
if you're listening to this podcast, you probably know what bisexuality is, but there were also a lot of questions that were really, next level. So I want to ask you about some of those. But
God, you're going to expect me to remember everything I wrote. Here we go.
yes, if
What if my
you
answers
better
have
have
changed?
you better have the same answers as what are in your book, because you better be consistent. You shouldn't have changing feelings over time. That would be
No,
weird and
never, never.
not normal. That doesn't exist.
No. Well, I'll
Everyone
tell you
has
what was
fixed views on
interesting with
everything. Yeah,
I'll
go
tell
ahead.
you what was interesting with writing the book. So it was a very admin-y thing to do, because I sort of went back through the column and generalized some of the things I've been asked. And then I
Uh-huh.
went back to some of the old articles and things like that. And then I had to kind of separate them out into chapters. So this fits in health, this fits in relationships, whatever. Then I had to try and build out like, okay, what are some of the questions that I've maybe been asked ad hoc that I haven't publicly responded to, and what people said over the years. And then I had to start writing them. And I would go back and look at some of the old things I said and was like, my thinking on this has changed actually. And so it was really weird to see that I was disagreeing with myself throughout a lot of it.
Actually, like a bisexual book in print is kind of what's the word? It's kind of counterintuitive, or by definition not what should exist, because how can we put our thoughts into a book in print that stays fixed as it is forever when our
Mm.
feelings are constantly changing over time?
Then you get
I've
a
read my
second book.
yeah, I guess so. We need like those Harry Potter books that just kind of can magically change as a new thought comes
Yes.
to you, and just the type just changes later as our feelings evolve. Uh, okay,
Mm.
so the book kind of towards the beginning. There's a section on coming out that I liked, and there were two questions in a row that separately they're kind of like questions I've seen before, but together it made me think like about something, which is one question was, how do I prove to the haters that I'm not secretly gay? And right,
Hmm.
that's like a big question for bisexual men, is like, people are going to think I'm gay. It's so common. And I know I'm not gay, but I'm afraid if I come out, people will think I'm gay. But then the next question was, how do I make sure the world doesn't just see me as bisexual, which is something I've struggled with, and probably you especially, being like public bisexuals, but I think other people too. Like once you start to come out, that becomes this like thing that defines you, and you're the
Yeah.
bi person in your friend group, and every time you hang out with people, that's what they talk about. So it's this, how do you navigate that? Like when you come out, you don't want to be seen as gay, so you hit the bi thing hard, but
Yeah.
then you're almost too bisexual, and that's the only thing that defines you. How do you navigate that?
Yeah, it's really hard. I mean, I always comes down to the individual. Like some people like me love being seen as the bisexual guy because that's kind of my thing. Um, But I think for me, it's about having, if you don't want to be seen as too bisexual, then you have to have other things going on. So it
Mhm.
might be that, I'm bisexual, but actually, Lewis just does not stop talking about Star Trek and how much he loves Star Trek. And he's going to the Star Trek con and he's posting pictures of himself in the Star Trek uniform. So I think it's about making sure that you have other things going on outside of your bisexuality. that people are, oh, he has this taste in music or whatever, where actually, whilst people know that about you, actually you're then moving on to your other interests and the other things going on in your life. Or, oh my God, Lewis just always has like the most dramatic stories from his weekend or whatever it is.
Mhm,
Think about what
mhm.
you want to be known for and what you want people to remember about you, and then lean into that as much as you do the bisexual stuff.
Interesting. I like it. All right, I'm gonna have to develop some new interests besides men and women. Um, and then okay, and then there's a series of questions that I think is like what so many people ask, and like you said, like with this podcast and now my book, I get those messages too, not in an email, but on social media. Usually, people often writing a long story about their journey, and usually just like saying thanks for doing this stuff, but sometimes asking questions, and I try to respond to them, but you're right, like
Don't you
it
feel
does.
awful when you can't get to them all? Someone's literally opened
Yeah,
up their soul to you, and you're probably one of the only person that they can talk to about this, and you just didn't get back to
yeah,
them. It's just an awful feeling.
yeah. Sometimes I find it like a year later, and I had forgotten, and just like it slipped by. And I usually try to write back to people and just say thanks so much for writing, and like thanks for sharing, and good luck. And I don't really get into it, but I try to just acknowledge that they sent me something, or say, something. But so many people ask about this, which is like family stuff and coming out to family. So some of the questions in your book are like, is it worth coming out to my family? Is it too late to let my wife or husband know I'm bisexual? What's the best way to come out to my kids as bisexual? So I'm curious if you want to share like your family situation and your coming out to them, or like what do you recommend to people?
Yeah, well, I can talk about my family situation. So I live in London, but my family is from a place called the Midlands in the UK by Birmingham, although we pronounce it Birmingham. Um, and basically, I just felt like I was living two separate lives. It was like they don't need to know who I'm dating. Like I have my life in London, and what does it matter? And I definitely was probably in that space of like, there's no point coming out and risking trouble if I then end up with a girl anyway. Like, what's the
Mhm,
point? Like, I'll let them
mhm,
know if like I end up with a guy, and then that's that. What actually happened? I mean, I come out to different people in the family over the years, but my big probably coming out moment was really when I met my fiance. And I think this is the one thing with coming out that no one ever talks about. So I think when people say come out, like um, there's sort of like this pressure to come out all the time, right? And
mhm,
oh, you're bisexual, quick out of the closet. And it's like no, actually, sometimes people aren't ready. And I remember early days when I was like out as bi. I'll never forget one of my ex's boyfriend's friends said to me, "You don't get any 30-year-old bisexuals, do you?" And I was so like not confident in my sexuality, kind of maybe thought there was something wrong with it. I was like, oh yeah, I guess. You know what I mean? And it was like I kick myself now that I like wasn't strong enough to stand up for myself back in those days. I think sometimes you need to be in that space where you feel strong enough to come out, or sometimes like I've had enough. Like, okay, if you can't accept me for this, then like fine, I'd rather not have you around or whatever it is. For me, the motivation with like, right, I'm coming out to all of them was that I was in a relationship with a girl that I knew I was going to go the distance with. And
uh-huh,
it suddenly occurred to me where I was like, oh my God, if I don't come out, they're gonna think that I'm straight my entire life. I'm gonna always have to play straight for them. And the
mhm,
fear of that is what forced me to come out, where it was like, by the way, I'm dating this girl, but I just want you to know I'm bisexual.
mm.
Because I was just
Interesting.
I don't want to be seen as straight for the rest of my life. And
Yeah,
that for me was like, oh, after all these years of sort of dating people and it being ambiguous, it
yeah.
it became this thing. So
That's funny that the thing that prompted it was finally like finding a life partner of a different gender, where you could, the thing that you thought would allow you to not have to come out ever actually made you want to come out finally.
yeah, life's funny like that.
Yeah,
Haha.
yeah,
Just,
yeah.
but so I would say that. And my tip on coming out, and I think I say it in the book as well, is I would say build up your experience with coming out with people that don't matter. If you're thinking of coming out, don't go to the most important person in your life because you have no experience in coming out. I would say come out first to a stranger in a bar. You know what I mean? Actually
Yeah.
deal with like questions from people that don't matter. Go to your friend that you don't actually mind if you know, don't see each other again. You know what I mean? Like go
Mhm.
to the lowest people in your life first.
Uh-huh.
And then if they
Interesting.
have questions, then you're kind of like, oh, I'm prepared for it. And build your
Yeah.
way up to the most important people in your life. I think so many people start with the most important people in their life.
Yeah.
And that I think is my hot tip on coming out.
Oh, that's actually really interesting because I've talked to some couples who like the guy comes out to his wife for the and that's the first person he shares it with, and she like wants a lot of answers and is really confused and wants reassurance, and he's like, I don't know. No one's ever asked me that. I'm not really sure. And so, actually, what you're saying makes sense and kind of reminds me. I mean, I wasn't in a serious relationship when I came out, which I think was kind of helpful for me because it took some pressure off of the
Yeah.
coming out process. But I realized I thought my friend, one of my friends was the first person I came out to. But actually, I had been coming out to a lot of guys I was hooking up with secretly for years. And they had
Hmm.
asked me a bunch of questions. And then I went to this discussion group where I met 30 strangers and talked about it with them. And I knew none of them. So it felt very easy and safe in a weird way. And actually, that all helped prepare me for when I came out to closer friends and family. And that I never
Yeah.
really thought about it that way though. That's especially if you're in a relationship already or married already and thinking about coming out, it can seem like how do I talk to someone other than my partner first? That's weird and I should go straight to my partner, but I think that's actually pretty interesting advice.
Yeah. Plan a whole night of it. Go to a bar where you don't know anyone, and just tell yourself, "I'm going to come out to three people tonight."
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like set yourself a
Interesting.
time, and especially because that one about how do I come out to my wife is probably the most common question I've been asked.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and it's not easy, and it really does not go well a lot of the time. So you kind of have to have a real game plan for that. You really need to be
Yeah.
ready for all of those questions that are going to come your way.
Right. Yeah, I'm doing like some life coaching now for bi men. I mean, I'm coaching anyone, but most of my clients are bi men, and most of them are either about to come out to their wives. Most of them are married to women and about to come out to their wives, or recently came out to their wives and are discussing it, or came out but want to sort of negotiate or integrate it more into their lives. So it is probably the most common struggle I've seen. And it really does depend on each person and their partner and where you are. And like you have to meet your partner kind of where they are at
Well, I
first.
found the two most the two biggest factors to remember in all of that. Number one is no matter what she says to you, what she's really going to be asking is, how is my life going to be changed by this news?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And you need to have a really strong answer on that. It can't be, I don't really know. You need to be saying, this is just an FYI because I want to be honest about who I am and close with you. Um, this is, actually, I would be open to exploring an open relationship if you're interested in it. But actually, if you really aren't, then that it's not a necessity. Blah blah. Blah. Or I need to explore this, and I hope you're okay with that. So, and there's
Yeah.
lots of different things outside of those three examples I gave. So I think number one is you have to have a really clear vision for how is this going to change your partner's life. That's what she's going to want to know. And the second thing to always get across, I think, is you have always been married to a bisexual man. It's just that now you know about it. So
Right.
reminding them of the
Yeah.
relationship before. This isn't completely throwing everything out of the water. They've already done it. They've already been in a relationship
Yeah.
with a bisexual man all this time.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. And it's just becoming open and honest, and you're learning something that was there. Yeah. When you met your partner, were you out quick? Like when did you come out to your partner? Were you are I guess you were already out it very publicly, right? So this wasn't an issue for you, or
Well,
was
this
it?
was kind of before a lot of the bisexual stuff got started, like
Uh,
publicly. But I didn't have to come out to my other half because we met at a house party, and basically it was through a mutual friend, and that mutual friend had said like who she would meet at the house party, and she was like, "Oh, you meet Lewis, this is bi guy, blah blah blah." And not only that, she maybe saw me a little bit in action with a guy that I was there with at the time. So there was like no hiding it.
Cool. And she was cool with it the whole time, or was there any like conflict?
She was totally like fine with it. Like she knew what she was getting into with a bi guy. I don't think that there were ever any issues with me being bisexual. I think that there are some maybe situations that all bi people can sometimes fall into when you go from dating a guy to a girl. So just for context, I dated a guy. I was single for 6 months, and then I went into dating a girl. And I think maybe just bringing some of that, like, well, this is what it was like when I dated a guy, attitude into dating a girl is not always, it doesn't always fly, and you do have to think about it. Like I said, gay and straight people in particular, they have particular ways they like you to do things. So, like the example I always give is, when I was with my ex-boyfriend, and he messaged at 2 a.m. drunk on the way home, was like, I'm on the way home, like, blah, blah, blah. I'm on the bus. My idea of being a good boyfriend would be like to wait before starting the next episode on whatever I was watching on Netflix. When your girlfriend says that, you go to the bus stop and you wait for her to get off and you walk her home. And that, things like that, there are different, but even like, just being involved in the gay culture, which is very handsy and very, gay guys always trying to kiss you and stuff and all that kind of stuff. And my other half being like, but if a straight guy was kissing me and hugging me, like, would that be okay? And kind of being like, oh, I guess maybe that wouldn't, but then why do I think that wouldn't? So it can be kind of challenging. So I would say maybe there were some cultural differences when we started dating that we had to iron out, but nothing like fundamentally with me being bi.
Yeah, interesting. That actually sounds like me and my relationship with one person, because she transitioned her gender, and like actually we had to culturally sort of change some things that like I assumed we could keep doing the same things because we were the same people, but actually part of her transition was like she wanted to be treated more like a woman, obviously, which makes sense. And like, so I didn't go from one person to another. It was the same person, but we kind of did have to transition the way we related to each other in some ways, because she preferred that.
Oh, that's really interesting. Now there is a book.
Yeah. But it's exactly like what you're saying with two different people in terms of the culture, but it was just with one person.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to this episode of Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy. There's more with Lewis Oakley. We recorded a longer interview, and I decided, again, to split it into two. That just seems to be the way this season is going. Weekly, but all divided into two, so essentially the same as bi-weekly, but not divided into two. Anyway, I don't know. Is it working? Is it not? Who cares? Or maybe you do care. Give me some feedback. This workflow works for me, so there's more with Lewis Oakley coming up next week. Since this half ended up being a little bit short, I've decided to pad the episode out a little. As you know from last episode, or maybe just from social media, I've been doing some stand-up comedy lately. It's very bisexual. I also talk a lot about having an open marriage and being polyamorous, and a lot of the kind of stuff that I talk about here on the podcast. So if you've already seen it, maybe on Instagram, maybe on YouTube, then you can fast forward, ignore the rest of this episode. But just in case, I'm going to put one of my sets here at the end of this episode for you to enjoy. Just in case you haven't heard the full set, or you don't know where it is on YouTube or my website, and you're listening to this podcast feed, here it is. I'm making it easy for you. I'm doing shameless self-promotion because it's my podcast and it's just me. And so I can do whatever I want. I edit it and I can edit it how I want. So here you go. This is my first ever show that I did. I took a stand-up class and this was our class showcase. So I had done some open mics, but this is the first real show I ever did. It is on YouTube. It is on my website, robertbrookscohen.com. But here it is. It's about 6 minutes. Enjoy. Thanks for listening to this episode, and I'll see you next week.
Give it up for Rob Cohen!
Hi, everyone. I'm Rob. Hi. Hi. Hello. I'm Rob, and I am bisexual. Or as my wife says, gay. I was straight for a while. I thought so. I didn't start exploring with men until my late 20s. And it's really scary when you're just starting to explore because you can out yourself unexpectedly before you're ready. Like this one time I went to a gay masturbation party. Anyone ever been to one of those? And I went and I wasn't out yet and I spotted a coworker there. And I was terrified. I barely even looked at him while we were jerking each other off. I used to think that being with men would be this like wildly different experience, but it's actually surprisingly similar to being with women. Like, regardless of gender, kissing feels the same. And regardless of gender, there's an emotional connection. And regardless of gender, they always ask, is it in yet? Even the courtship process feels similar. Like with women, before you have sex, you have to look into their eyes and listen and be attentive to their feelings and their desires. And with men, you have to look into their eyes, and that's it, actually. Most bi guys are not out. So if you do come out as bi, a lot of other guys will start coming out to you and only you. This has been happening to me a lot lately. I feel like a priest. They're all like, bless me, Robert, for I am bi. It's been 3 days since my last anonymous blowjob. I'm truly sorry for not reciprocating, but I still think that dicks are kind of gross. And I'm like, okay, get down on your knees and give me 5 Who's Your Daddies. But I'm not just a gay priest, I'm also Jewish. Thank you. What's weird about being Jewish is that the most extravagant parties you ever went to in your entire life were all during the 7th grade bar mitzvah circuit. Like, when I was in 7th grade, I went to a bar mitzvah on a yacht that circled the Statue of Liberty with a 15-piece band and a caviar buffet. So yeah, sorry, Tiffany, that I'm not super excited about your rustic barnyard wedding. Those bar mitzvahs really set me up for a lifetime of disappointment, which is a core Jewish value, so it worked. I don't have kids yet, but most of my friends do. Isn't it weird seeing your friends' annoying qualities get passed down to their kids? Like, my one friend, he's so stingy, and now his 8-year-old won't even loan me money. I'm also married. I've been with my wife for 5 years. We have an open relationship, but sometimes when we want to spice things up, we'll try monogamy. The craziest thing, we're poly, so we date other people, and the craziest thing about that is helping your spouse through a breakup with someone else. Like, recently my wife was telling me about this guy that she broke up with, and she was really upset, and she was like, he never talks about his feelings, and he only texts me when he wants sex, and he wants me to do kinky things in bed. And I was like, oh, babe, that sucks. Can I have his number, though? It's hard explaining an open marriage to your parents. My mom was really confused. She was like, if you love each other, why bring other people into it? And I was like, well, you and Dad love each other, and you brought me into it. And she was like, oh, honey, no, we stopped loving each other long before we had you. I am codependent with my mom. I used to hide things from her that she might not approve of, but then she'd be even more mad that I kept a secret. Like, she was totally cool that I was bi, but she was upset that I didn't tell her sooner. So now I just check in with her whenever I try something new. Last week I called her and I was like, hey mom, I'm at this party and I'm about to get Eiffel Towered. That's when, oh, you've heard of it. Yeah, both holes, that's right. Well, thank you, but I wasn't asking for your permission. I was just letting you know. Yes, Mom, I'll remember to tickle the balls. Ew, I do not need to know how much Dad likes that. Thank you guys, I'm Rob Cohen.
Give it up for tickling the balls. Right?
Hey guys, hope you enjoyed that. That was my first stand-up set. I have a few more, maybe I'll include them here, but you can go watch them right now on my website or on YouTube, robertbrookscohen.com. That's all I got for today. Stay tuned for more with Lewis Oakley next week. And if you're listening to this on the day it comes out, happy Bisexual Visibility Day, or as it's also known, Celebrate Bisexuality Day. Whatever you want to call it, be visible, be bi, do crimes, and enjoy the rest of Bi Visibility Month and the rest of September. See you next week, and thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy. Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy is produced and edited by me, Robert Brooks Cohen, and it was created by me and Alex Boyd. Our new logo art is by Caitlin Weinman. Our music is by Ross Mincer. To help support this podcast, visit patreon.com/Robert Brooks Cohen. You get early access, bonus content, and full video episodes. Visit robertbrookscohen.com to learn more about my coaching, my book, and my stand-up comedy. And thanks for listening to Two Bi Guys by One Bi Guy.